So to get into this deeper, I want to bring in Brett Schaefer. He's with the Heritage Foundation. Brett, you saw that. Welcome to the program. You saw what President Obama just said. Do you think, based on his comments, this is true, that we're going to have problems making deals with other countries in the future?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, two things leaped to mind when I heard those comments. The first is that President Obama negotiated those agreements and essentially entered into them without seeking Senate ratification. And if you want a treaty or an agreement to last, to be permanent, you go to the Senate, you make sure that you have bipartisan support, which requires 2/3 of the Senate for advice and consent. And then the agreement is virtually assured of permanence. He chose not to do that. He chose to negotiate the Paris Accord and not submit it as a treaty to the Senate, and instead said it was a political agreement, which made it much easier for President Trump to withdraw from that agreement. And he also went to the UN for the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, instead of going to the Senate, where he was facing quite strong headwinds in terms of getting support there. So in some ways, President Obama has himself to blame for not choosing to go the treaty route on those two agreements if he wanted them to last. The second part of it is that just because an agreement exists doesn't mean that the United States should stick with it. And that is the case with both the Iran nuclear deal and the Paris Accord. Neither of them are an effective agreement. The purpose of the Iran nuclear deal was to try and prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And what you instead got through that agreement is sort of a pause on Iran's nuclear ambitions, after which they would be able to, all of the UN sanctions and economic sanctions would be removed, and they would be tacitly approved to become a nuclear power. And that is not in the interest of the United States, it's not in the interest of Europe, and it's not in the interest of the world or the region. In terms of Paris, if you take a look at that agreement, even if every country perfectly adhered to its commitments and its promises under the Paris Accord, it doesn't get you to the purported goals of the agreement, which is to limit climate change or increase in global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. There's virtually no way that the promises under Paris are going to get you to that goal. And in fact, aside from this year, which has been rather unusual in terms of the economic growth in terms of the United States and indeed the world, where you've had this global recession due to the global pandemic, COVID-19, you're not, absent that, you weren't even going to be on target for a lot of these 2030 pledges that these countries have made. And if you look back just a year, you see indeed that most countries were not on target for their own pledges and their own goals.
And that was even with all of these shutdowns. This is the thing that people aren't realizing, all of these shutdowns. And I think the bizarre thing about this is that a climate transparency group, they assign a score based on a climate action tracker every year. And this year they came out and they said, India is the only nation doing their fair share. I think in this case, it's almost like when you have two people, one skinny person and one heavy person, and the heavy person loses a lot of weight and the skinny person doesn't lose as much, and they go, wow, it was easier for you. I mean, India had a lot of pollution. They have a lot of problems here. So for them, it's easier for them to get on track faster, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and you can also see a lot of what Europe's gains in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of those had to do with the end of the Cold War in Eastern European countries that are part of the EU now, reducing emissions due to extraordinarily dirty emission standards under the Soviet era and in Eastern Europe. And so converting from very dirty coal plants to nuclear plants and to natural gas and other forms of power that are much cleaner, you can rapidly gain in terms of progress in terms of emissions on things like that.
And really quickly, we have about a minute left. Still looking at the Paris Climate Accord, even with the U.S. out, the U.S. still has some of the lowest numbers of emissions in the world. Isn't that true?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at the International Energy Agency, they said on a country basis, the U.S. had the lowest emissions or the highest emissions reductions in 2019, and that's before the pandemic. So the U.S. has been criticized for the announcement under President Trump to withdraw from the Paris Accord. But if you take a look at just emissions, the United States is doing better than virtually any other developed country.
Great. Brett Schaefer with the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for coming on today. Always very interesting to get a perspective on these things when we have so much debate about them in the world. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.